Hello, beginner art. This week we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take some time to look at an artist. The reason why I've decided to discuss the work of this artist is in relation to the Black Lives Matters and George Floyd protests that are currently going on around the world, but most in particular, they've been going on at large scale in the States. You may have heard of a little bit of information about these protests. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information about them today, exactly why they're happening, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit in relation to the work of an artist. So the artist that we're going to look at today is named Nick Cave. Nick Cave is an American artist. He's Black. He works in both mixed media, so mixed media being a combination of all different types of media being what we make art out of, so combination of textiles, combination of found objects, paint, fabric, all sorts of odds and ends is what he makes his work out of. He also likes to incorporate dance and performance art. The major thing that Nick Cave is well known for is his work called Sound Suits, which is a series of different suits, so they're actually wearable sculptures that are made from fabric and other bright and whimsical items. So here's an idea of what some of them look like. There's quite a bit of variety in the sound suits that Nick Cave has made. So some of them are made out of things like buttons, some of them are made out of things like found objects, fabric, fur. So here's kind of an idea. And they're quite funky and fun and kind of out of this world. So we're going to take some time to look at them. So again, what exactly is a sound suit? It's a wearable sculpture. So these costumes, you could call them, are in lots and lots of museums, but Nick Cave also uses them during dances and performances. So these sculptures actually move. As we'll discuss kind of in more depth, they do hide the identity of the person wearing the suit, which we will discuss why that's kind of talking a little bit about what's really relevant to the States. And they are a political statement. So sometimes when artists are faced with a really difficult situation, they respond in a visual way to kind of comment or draw attention to an injustice or a circumstance. So Nick Cave created his first sound suit out of mostly twigs. It was in response to the Rodney King beating in 1992. So he's been making these suits for a very, very long time. And we'll talk a little bit about who Rodney King was in just a moment. So Cave was sitting in a park after this incident, feeling very, very vulnerable, upset, and kind of disregarded as a Black man in America. And he saw a twig on the ground. What he decided to do is he gathered all these twigs and he actually brought them home and constructed a suit of armor that was symbolic using all of these twigs. So here's an example of it right here. Yeah. So Rodney King was a Black man in Los Angeles who was pulled over by the LA police after a high-speed chase. So he was running away from the police because he was scared of them and because he had some previous crimes that he had to kind of discuss with them. So what happened is the police officers pulled him out of the car and instead of just arresting him and taking him to the local precinct and like going through the right kind of procedure, what they did is they brutally beat him. So he was very, very injured by this incident, and the whole incident was caught on tape. So there is video evidence of it. So the 4 police officers that were involved were given charges of assault with a deadly weapon and excessive use of force by police officers. So they were originally charged. But what ended up happening, unfortunately, is after a 3-month trial, so they went to court to discuss it, white jury, so a jury that was made out of mostly white people, ended up acquitting the officer. So the charges were dropped, which made a lot of citizens obviously very upset because they had seen that justice hadn't been delivered, which resulted in the riots of 1992 in Los Angeles. So why I'm thinking and kind of tying back to this is that Nick Cave has made a lot of work in relation to Black Lives Matter in response to police brutality, and I wanted to take some time to kind of look at this. Why this is specifically very relevant today is that in the States currently, there are several protests going on related to George Floyd. In fact, they're so widespread that they've actually expanded past the US, and they're in Canada and all around the world. So George Floyd protests are an ongoing series of protests, riots, and demonstrations against police brutality. So when police use excessive force or are too violent with the people that they're placing in custody. And it goes beyond the necessary kind of need, as well as racism that already exists in policing. So these protests began in the United States in Minneapolis, which is where George Floyd was killed on May 26. And they followed the actual killing of George Floyd, who was a 46-year-old Black man who unfortunately went into a convenience store, and the clerk thought that his $20 bill was counterfeit. So a police officer was called to the scene. And then George Floyd was pinned down, and the police officer kneeled on his neck, and this resulted in George Floyd's death, which was very sad. So in all of this sadness and frustration, what has happened is people have taken to the streets to express not only their feelings about the injustice that was the killing of George Floyd, but the injustice that is faced by people of color, as well as Black people in the States, in relation to police brutality and treatment from police on a day-to-day basis. So why are people still protesting over 25 years later? I've seen a lot of comments about how the riots are very unnecessary, and that this has been dealt with, but the reality is that unfortunately Black Americans are more likely to be killed by the police than white Americans, so almost 3 times as often, as well as Black Americans are way more likely to be pulled over by the police, which can result in situations escalating and becoming very, very dangerous. So the protests are really occurring because there's a lot of injustice that's still going on towards this. And we could definitely discuss that a little bit more in detail, but I'm just giving you a little bit of information about it. So that is why the protests are happening. So the idea behind Nick Cave's sound suits is that they have often been described as a protective or second skin. So Nick Cave created this sound suit in result to his feelings regarding the protests, and how as a Black American he felt like he was being judged when he walked on the street, and that his identity was resulting in violence being inflicted upon him. So this idea between the sound suits is they are described as a protective second skin. So there's something that protects the wearer because it partially conceals or hides their identity and race. So a police officer or a person could not make a snap judgment about who this person was because their race and identity have been hidden. So it works as a sort of armor that protects against violence of racial stereotypes. So it protects people, but it also celebrates identity because they are so flamboyant and brightly colored and have so much personality. So part of it is about kind of adopting the identity of the sculpture or garment and being a person that is more than the color of their skin. So why is it called a sound suit? The idea of sound suits is that in protest, you have to speak loud in order to be heard. So the sound suits kind of function as a way of protest because they're not only loud in kind of their flamboyance and color, but they also make noises which draw attention to them, just like we want to draw attention to movements like this. And people have to get out into the streets and raise their voices. So I'm going to show you a quick little clip about Nick Cave.
What is a sound suit? A sound suit is this sort of wearable sculpture. It can be very still, and yet it can be extremely animated. It's a suit of armor, a retaliation vestment, a political statement. It's a shaman. The first sound suit came out of frustration and my sort of concern as a Black male in America, feeling devalued, discarded, dismissed. I was sitting in the park one day and I'm just emotionally struggling with the Rodney King incident. And I happened to look down at the ground and there was this twig. And I looked at that twig and I thought it was something discarded. That symbolically represented how I felt as a Black male. The simple twig was the catalyst for my first sound suit. And so then I proceeded to collect all the twigs in the park, took them back to the studio, started to build this sculpture. And the moment that I put it on the body, it started to move. It then made sound, which then led me to this other expression that was focused around protest. In order to be heard, you gotta speak louder. When I made the first sound suit, I knew by just looking at it that it would change my life. I could tell that this was something other. My first exhibition was in '96, and it was 30 sound suits. And they basically sold that entire show within a month. This was like this overnight sensation, I swear to God. Today, I'm able to work in this vast arena, working between bronze and wood and fiber and performance. In the studio, at any given time, there's always 8 assistants just prepping and getting materials ready. I'm very particular about how things are built. It's deliberate, every move is critically decided. It's a sort of collage of elements coming together. We are in the Park Armory in New York City. We are in the beginning phases of a performance titled Upright. Upright is this performance that really is this sort of rite of passage that is accompanied by 12 dancers and a gospel choir from Harlem. The part of the process of collaboration is the most gratifying thing that I do. I like to bring a project to a city and hire the city to build the project. There's a lot of work that is gathered from narratives and stories within the communities. All of this is all folded into a larger sort of project. So that's why I do it. my consciousness being awakened has allowed me to sort of find purpose.
So your task this week is to create 2 different prototypes or designs for sound suits / safe spaces to camouflage yourself to protect yourself from something. I've provided a list of somethings which I'm going to go over on the next slide, which are also in your assignment. So 2 different prototypes. By prototypes, I mean you're going to create drawings. So this is an example of a prototype for a spinning object. You're going to make a prototype or a drawing for a sound suit, okay? So that should include some figures about what materials it's made of, what the shape of the sound suit will be, what does it look like? Is it super circular? Is it super kind of cluttered? Is it narrow? Is it shiny? Is it connected to other sound suits? Okay. So you're going to create a prototype, which is a drawing of a sound suit. Each prototype drawing must have color. So I want to know what color your sound suit is going to be. So try and dig up some pencil crayons that you can use to color your sound suit. And I want it to fill one 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So a standard piece of printer paper. So you're going to make 2 drawings. So 2 drawings of prototypes that include color and that are drawings that are labeled. If you would like, you can obviously do this digitally on an iPad or a tablet or on your computer. So if you want to draw it digitally, go for it. That's super exciting. So this is a list of things that you could think about using as a topic. So Nick Cave's work is about protecting yourself from racial profiling and police brutality. So your work does not have to be as emotionally heavy as Cave's work. But what I would like you to do is consider one of these topics or something else. So here's some ideas. Housework. What does it look like to protect yourself from housework? Maybe you've got like a really dirty suit, so you can camouflage with the dirt in your house. I don't know. So it's like a giant dust bunny suit. Homework. Social media pressure, a test you aren't ready for, a school dance, waking up in the morning for school, adulthood or puberty. Maybe you're really nervous about getting older and moving on past high school. What kind of suit could protect you from that? A first date, another social justice issue. So if you want to make a suit in relation to police brutality, that would be fitting underneath this subject here. So social justice issue. It could be something related to climate change. It could be in relation to COVID-19, anxiety, or anything else you think would be a suitable subject. So it doesn't need to be emotionally heavy, but if you want to make it emotionally heavy, you have the option of doing so. What you're going to do is you're going to create 2 different drawings of sound suit designs. These drawings should show what your suit would look like and include notes about the materials you want to use. So if you're going to use buttons, fabric, and cardboard, you're going to list those materials on your sheet. So these are the things your suit drawing needs to have. It needs to have color. It needs to have a materials list. So what is your sound suit made of? I want you to incorporate at least 6 different materials. Remember, part of Nick Cave's work is also thinking about thinking outside of the box in terms of materials. So this one's covered in buttons and has an abacus. This one's covered in twigs. We've got some other objects. So try and think a little bit outside of the box, not just your standard fabric suit. So think about different shapes, think about different types of materials you can incorporate to kind of explore your idea. I want you to explain why you've chosen the materials you have. How do they connect to your concept? So in the case of the Rodney King suit, Nick Cave picked the twig because it was something that had been discarded and not necessarily valued, and that's how he felt he had been treated as a black man living in America. Later on, he went to use more flamboyant colors to celebrate black identity and discuss that. But initially, he picked something very kind of minimalistic and not necessarily seen as important, like twig. So think about why you've chosen the material you have, because I'd like an explanation of why. So 2 to 3 sentences, at least explaining why you've chosen certain materials, where you would wear the suit, any size specifications, how big is your suit? Does it make the person who's wearing it look taller or smaller or wider or very, very narrow? Does your suit make sound? What type of noise does it make when it moves? And why does it make sound? What types of sound does it make? So that's your task. I'm looking forward to seeing it. And good luck.